Hello, and welcome to TP's Music Talk Podcast. My name is Ryan Ford.
And I'm Nick Replinger.
And you can find us at our website, tpmusictalkpod.wordpress.com.
And you can also find us at anchor.fm/TP Music Talk Podcast and other major podcasting platforms by searching for TP's Music Talk Podcast.
You can find us on other social media as well, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, and others by searching for TP Music Talk Podcast or for TP Music Talk Pod on Twitter. Just look for our logo.
And you can also email us at tpmusictalkpodcast@gmail.com.
We also have shared playlists on Apple Music and Spotify that you can check out by searching TP's Music Talk Podcast as well.
And don't forget to click the link in the description and leave us a voice message on Anchor. And feel free to leave us a message or a review anywhere you're listening. It really helps us out. And don't forget, donations are always appreciated. You can find a link to donate in the description of any of our episodes.
No part of our show can be reproduced without permission or written consent. IEngraveStuff.com is a local engraving service based in Linden, Utah. If you want an amazing engraving done on one of your personal belongings, get in touch with one of their specialists today. You might meet McKay, who is one of the main brains of the operation. He's also one of our close friends and the drummer of Nick's band Blix 10. Follow their Instagram page to stay in touch with the latest news for iEngraveStuff. And be sure to type in TP10 in all caps in the promo code box when you're shopping online at their store.
I really enjoy their work. They make engraving look easy when it actually has quite a few factors that come into play. Many things can switch and cause a problem, but the pyros at iEngraveStuff have it down to a science. They are continually improving their craft, which has been cool to see. If you want in on this action, look up iEngraveStuff on Instagram, Facebook, and iEngraveStuff.com.
Yep, that's the letter I,
and then engrave,
and then stuff.
iEngraveStuff.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Transmitter. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Nick, and we have an exciting episode for you today.
Yeah, today we're going to be interviewing Amy Walker, and before we get into the interview, we just wanted to try and update you a bit on some things that are going on. One thing that I know we've wanted to tell you for a while that we keep forgetting is be sure and leave us some voice messages if you want. We actually are encouraging it because we want to use some of those voice messages in our episodes, and we want to hear what you guys think, and we just think it would be a fun way to interact with you guys. So yeah, be sure to leave us some voice messages. You can find the link on Facebook if you go to our little description, or you can also find it on our Anchor website if you go to our podcast on Anchor. You won't find it anywhere else. You'll just find links to it if you go to Apple Music or Spotify or those other popular, not Apple Music, but the podcast app. Yeah, but I think that's all I've got. Also, I hope we're sounding a little better because we've got some new soundproof panels. We mentioned that last episode, and I'm very proud of it, so I'm going to keep bringing that up.
There you go. Yeah. And and we also want to talk about my band's album release concert coming up on March 25th. We also have two great bands opening for us, Private School Boys. We had Jordan Cokerhands on our last episode, and we talked about their EP that they just released, and another band that we've done a Battle of the Bands with, Prince Duck, which also Ryan Davis, who is the bassist for Blix 10, has also joined them on bass as well, which is how we know them. And yeah, it's going to be exciting. It's going to be at the Rise Studios on March 25th. I think it's going to be at 7 o'clock. It might change. Just follow our social medias and we'll be posting a lot about it for sure.
I also wanted to mention Jordan Cokerhands. Jordan Cokerhands. I'm pretty sure it's either Cokerhands or Cokerhands. Jordan, we're so sorry. Hopefully we didn't scare you away.
Yeah, and then, also one more thing. Blix 10 just released our second single off of our album called Negativity. It's out on iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere else you can stream music, YouTube. Go and check it out. We've worked really hard on it, and we're excited to share our music with you guys, too.
All right. So yeah, before we get into this, I just wanted to say Amy Walker is my mother, and
Ryan was desperate.
We're not desperate. we just thought it would be really cool to interview her today because my mom actually knows a ton about music. And if you've listened to our 4th episode with Lacey Walker, or Lacey Powell, she goes by both, I think. I think she likes Walker better. Anyway, beside the point, we kind of talked about music from the younger generation because, Lacey He's about 6 years younger than us. And, 6 years isn't a whole lot of time, but in the music world, it's a ton of time. And so much can transpire during that amount of time. And so to be able to interview someone who has, been alive for longer than us is really cool, because there's so much music, especially in like the 70s and 80s, even in the 90s, that is just amazing. So
a lot better than today's generation, in my personal humble opinion. But
yeah, like the 80s is the
best.
best.
Growing up with that stuff, I love it. Absolutely love that music, and it is something that will never tire with me. And I'm excited to to talk with you, Amy, and all these different things about how you experienced it as it was coming out, rather than me just growing up and listening to it when it's been out for a long time. But let's go ahead and just have you introduce yourself a little bit if you want to say anything, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah,
Okay.
How are you doing?
Good. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. Glad Ryan wasn't too embarrassed to invite his mom.
Not at all.
So hopefully, we can talk about some fun bands and that influenced me over the years.
Oh, yeah. And we're so excited. Like, honestly, even though you consider yourself a casual listener, I'm sure that there's tons of music that you know about that I don't know about. So, but yeah, we've got a whole bunch of questions to ask you. The first one being one of our favorite questions to ask anybody who comes on here. What music did you listen to growing up?
So it depends on what time period you're talking about. My mom, when I was tiny, my mom influenced me and listened to the Beatles, and then just basically your top 40 in the early 70s is what I remember listening to. But then if you go on to like junior high and high school, it would have been, say, Michael Jackson. High school would have been like Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, Tears for Fears. And then you've also got all of the like big hair bands from the 80s. So just a wide variety of music. In the 70s, my brother and sister influenced me a lot with music. They were big into rock.
Yeah.
So starting out when they were younger, it started out with maybe like the Carpenters, and then Elton John, and then more into like the Scorpions, AC/DC, those kinds of things. And so that, because my brother and sister were so much older than I was, I figured out pretty quickly that music brought us together, even though we were a decade apart. And their music was so much different than mine, being 10 years later.
Yeah.
But I just really learned to love all of their music. They were such a big influence in my life, and they liked rock and roll. So
Yeah. And it sounds like it's a huge spectrum too. I mean,
Yes.
everything from AC/DC to the Beatles. I mean, not only do you have a lot of different time periods in music that you've listened to, but just different genres. And yeah,
Absolutely.
It's really
Yes.
cool.
Yeah, so I guess kind of going along with that, with the different bands that you listen to in each of those decades, and also with the ones from your siblings that you listen to too, I guess what bands influenced you the most that you would say? Because like for my dad, his number one big band is Huey Lewis and the News. That's his all-time
I
favorites.
love that. Yeah.
And so I grew up listening to them, and I love them because of that. And
Yes.
I would definitely say Huey Lewis and the News has affected me, because that's my dad's favorite band. He introduced me to a lot of his music, and that was kind of my music growing up. I guess so. For you, what were some bands that were kind of like that, and like it's your all-time favorite? It influenced your life. What were some big bands like that for you?
So I'd have to say that Depeche Mode was a huge influence in my life, and it was the longest influence in my life because they've been around since the early 80s, and they're still around, and I still love everything about them to this day. Some of their music is darker, but it always has a meaning. So I'd have to say that that's probably the biggest influence, but there's just been so many depending on what I'm going through in my life. And so, but Depeche Mode definitely is probably the biggest influence to me.
And growing up with you and all the music that we listened to in the car, like especially after you met Dad, I
Yes.
mean, it was Depeche Mode all the time.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I remember I didn't like it at first, but it really has grown on me. Like I
Yeah.
love Depeche Mode today, and yeah, I didn't know what I was talking about back then. So,
Well, it was a stage, I guess.
I guess a bad stage.
Yeah.
And then, I guess another question to kind of go along with that is like, what older bands that you really liked when you were younger do you still listen to today and kind of fall back on?
Sure. And I have such a wide variety of music in my life. Like, I still listen to the Beatles. Those are a classic. I still listen to rock, all different kinds. I love Queen. I love just those rock bands from the 70s, Led Zeppelin. Anytime I hear those bands in my life, it just brings back a flood of memories, which is another great thing about music, is that it brings up memories from different times in your life. But there's a lot of, I went through a time in the 90s where it was Alanis Morissette, like,
Right.
loved her, so, and I still, when I hear one of her songs, I think of that period of my life and what what her music was influencing me,
Right.
So, and then, like, more current kind of stuff, I went through the boy band stage because my kids liked it,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
it was NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and then newer with Lacey was One Direction. And so there's just, I wouldn't say there's like specific bands that I hold on to besides Depeche Mode,
yeah.
but they all are just, I have such a love for all the different stages
Yeah.
and how it has brought me closer with you, Ryan, and with my kids.
Mhm.
Just because I really enjoy all music. I love listening to other people's music that they love and feel how passionate they are about it.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you connect everything with your favorite music. You kind of connect it to memories and good times you've had and good times you've had with people, which I think everybody does. And it's just really common. And that's why people love music so much. One of the many reasons, because you hear a song and it just takes you back to that moment in time. And it could have been from 30 years ago or, and it just takes you back to that day.
Exactly. And that's, it brings people together in all different ways, whether it's in a religious setting. Music is just big in pretty much any setting, and it always kind of brings people together.
Yeah.
So that's
undoubtedly
what I love about music.
Yeah, and so going into our next question, so how did some of the big well-known 70s, 80s, 90s bands affect you when they first hit the scene, when they were just released? What did you think about all these different musics in these different decades?
So one of the biggest things that I remember was when the electronic music first started coming out, and it was new. One of the first songs I remember was Soft Cell, Tainted Love.
Yes.
And that was just
a great one.
It was new, and the sound was new, and so it was just really, it influenced my life because I went on to like more of that type of music in the 80s, and it came out probably when I was, I want to say maybe 11 or so was when that song came out, and so that really influenced my life. And rock music, of course, I watched rock change so much over time, like from the Beatles, and then kind of going into the 70s where you've got Led Zeppelin and stuff.
Oh, yes.
And then going into the 80s where you've got Metallica.
Right.
And,
and metal started
and
to
metal
take off
and all of that. And so just watching that and how it developed over time and changed was just fascinating. And I didn't really realize it at the time because, just like now, you watch music change, but over a long period of time is when you really are like, wow, it was innovative, it was, new. So really exciting time to go through music, I think.
And kind of speaking of, this may be out of left field, but I'm going to relate it to the whole evolution of music. What did you use to listen to music growing up? And, what was your favorite way to listen that you remember, like the first medium that you remember using?
So what I remember listening to, say, in the car is 8-tracks. A lot of 8-tracks. And I remember going on camping trips. We had an 8-track in our camper. We had an 8-track in our boat. And so listening on 8-track. And then, so that was the portable way to listen to music, basically.
Yeah.
So if somebody who's listening doesn't know what is an 8-track, what is an 8-track?
So an 8-track tape is a large, I would say maybe it's 5 by 4 inches.
Yeah.
and it has tape that runs through it, similar to a cassette tape, but much, much larger
Right.
than that.
Yeah.
And you pushed the skinny end into an 8-track player, and then it had tracks on it, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
But-
and you could fast forward and
Right.
rewind, just
Yeah.
like you
So
could
similar,
with
like a cassette, yeah.
just a big cassette.
It's just a giant
Yeah.
cassette, and then at home it was records. It was I remember I got my first record player when I was probably 6 or 7, and would listen to disco music on my first record was disco. So it's really changed, especially now that everything's digital.
Right.
But through high school it was cassette tapes that we listened on, and then when CDs came out and DVDs, it was kind of overwhelming, because with the tapes you would have to fast forward and rewind to try to get to the first of a song.
Yeah.
If you wanted to listen to a specific song, you'd have to
Yeah.
kind of go back and forth between fast forward and rewind to get it right at the first of the song so you could listen to it. And with CDs, DVDs, you don't have to do that.
Exactly.
So-
Yeah, you could just skip right to the
Right.
next track.
Yeah. The other fun thing about cassette tapes is having a recorder and being able to, if you couldn't afford to buy, say, the records, then you could put a blank tape into a recorder and literally record it off the radio. The sound was
Oh,
not
yeah,
great,
that's
but
right.
you could do that. So-
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's another thing that I have written down here is to ask you about, we've kind of talked about 8-tracks and a little bit about cassettes and vinyls, but mixtapes, and, I was wondering if you could share your experiences with those, with cassettes, and then like the single vinyls, the 45s. I wanted to ask you about that because we had talked about that.
Yes. So the cassette tapes.
Oh, yeah, the mixtapes.
The mixtapes, yeah. So my brother and my sister were like the king and queen of mixtapes.
Okay.
And they were constantly making mixtapes, whether it was just typically when you get an album, you have some really popular songs on the album and then some maybe not so well-known or popular songs. So they'd go through and take all the really popular songs and group them together on a mixtape.
Yeah.
And my brother's handwriting, I can still see his handwriting on the mixtapes, of the songs that he would put together for me to listen to in my car or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was a great thing.
And then 45s, how, like,
Yeah.
because this was something that we haven't really talked about on this show yet. So 45s, could you describe them just for people who don't know?
Yeah, so you have an album, a full-size album that has every song on it.
Yeah.
But they had smaller records called 45s that would have one song on the front, one song on the back.
Right.
And they were much cheaper. So for me, I couldn't always afford the big album, but I could always go and afford to buy a 45.
Yeah.
So I had a stack of 45s and they were typically, those great songs off the albums, the popular songs that they played on the radio, that sort of thing.
It's kind of like buying singles today off of iTunes
Correct.
or Apple Music or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, but it was just a smaller,
Like a 7-inch.
probably,
Yeah.
about
and
that.
then
Yeah.
Vinyls
Like
were
a small tortilla or something.
Yeah.
like a street taco.
And it had the bigger hole in the center.
Okay,
So
yeah.
you had to have the little adapter instead of just the small hole for the albums.
Oh, yeah, that's
Does
right.
that
yeah.
make sense?
I haven't seen one in a long
Yeah,
time.
so you had to have the adapter to play them, the 45s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how those terms have kind of been lost. Like when we were talking about them about a week or so ago, we were like, what are they called? Like
I know, exactly.
And with like cassettes too, there's probably kids out there that are growing up that like you would maybe talk about a B-side or and
they have no idea.
They're
What?
like,
I saw this video where his dad handed them a cassette and asked them how they would play the music off of it. It was like, oh, where's the aux cord go in and all that stuff. And it's like, tell me what a pencil has to do with it as well too. And they're like, what? Well, like, do you like stick the pencil in through the hole or something? Or?
It's kind of like handing a child of today a rotary phone from the
Yeah.
80s and 70s. Like they're like, what do you do with
how do
this?
I even work this thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just so hilarious to see them try and figure out how to play music. They're like lifting it to their ear and like they had no idea. So
Yep.
Yeah, so lots of cool mediums that you've seen to with music and how to play it.
Well, and the cassette tapes, the portable, you can obviously play them in your car, But then you had the Walkmans,
Oh, yeah, that's
Right.
right.
the Sony Walkmans that you could put a cassette tape in and you could run. I mean, they were larger, obviously, than the earphones you see now.
Yeah.
But you could, exercise with them or whatever you wanted to do. So,
And I am proud to say that I actually have used a cassette Walkman before. My dad used to own one, a
Yeah.
really old, beat up Sony. It was just a black, it
Yep.
looked like a little black box, and you
Yep.
just pop it in. And
bigger than you can put in your pocket, for sure.
yeah, you'd have to carry
You
it
have to
around
carry it.
with you
Oh,
while
yeah.
you've got the, and the headphones were just obnoxious.
Yeah.
Like they were these
The foamy.
thin little, foam headphones, and
Yeah.
just crazy to think
Yeah.
about.
I never used one, but I had Discmans growing up. It's the same thing, but for
Yes,
CDs.
but for a disc.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Same concept,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
and before they had the pockets in book bags and backpacks for laptops and stuff, they
Yes.
had pockets for your Walkmans
Your
or your
Walkmans.
your
Discmans,
disc,
yeah.
Discman.
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
could string the headphones out of it and just have a little CD player.
Yeah,
in
some
there.
of my backpacks growing up had those. Yeah.
Yeah, those aren't even really a thing anymore, I don't think. So
Yeah. I mean, not with phones. Everybody has their phone and their
Yeah.
Bluetooth
Exactly.
yeah.
AirPods or whatever. Yeah.
Alrighty, so on to our next question, I guess. So let's go into, I guess, since we talked a little bit about the evolution of, how you listen to music, maybe we should go from the evolution of how it was kind of rock and roll was king, and then how into the 80s or so, pop became the kind of the king of the radio.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and it really kind of depends. Like, it was still, a separate genre that you're listening to, depending on your tastes for music. But yeah, definitely there was a lot more rock involved in the 70s, and then it kind of evolved into the big hair bands really in the 80s, or started the beginnings of metal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, rock kind of evolved that way, but I think people who went to high school like I did in the 80s, or junior high and high school in the 80s, the electronic kind of stuff definitely played a bigger role in school.
Right. The poppier.
Yeah,
kinda-
because what brought kids together in junior high and high school in the 80s was dances.
Right.
So beginning in the 7th grade, we had school dances, maybe once a month. And, they didn't play the hard rock. They played the stuff you can dance to, which is more the pop or the electronic kind of music. And that's what we did. That was our entertainment, basically, because we didn't have phones. We didn't have, all the things that they have now. TV was like 3 or 4 channels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there was something on TV, you might stay home and watch it. But for the most part, you're going out and you're going to dances for your entertainment with friends, or, interacting with people, which is rare nowadays. We're interacting with people in person,
Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah. And so that's how music kind of influenced me through the 80s, was through the dances that I would go to. And they were all the time. That's how kids got together.
That's how people
the
got to
80s.
know each other.
Yes.
And, you couldn't just sit in your room and text somebody and
Nope.
get to know them that way. You had to actually go out and interact.
Yep.
You had to dress up.
And until you got your driver's license, it was mom and dad's responsibility to get you to that dance so that you can interact with people your own age,
Right.
I see. Yeah.
So, yep, absolutely. But yeah, so rock was always there throughout, but maybe not so much in the interactions with other people, because, as far as
Like
because
socializing.
social gatherings
Yeah.
and stuff. It was more the electronic and, the pop kind of for that.
And I know that we I feel like we've already touched on this a little, but one of the questions we have here is what band or bands were you just obsessed with? And I think I could maybe twist that a little bit. Growing up, was there a band when you were a teenager that you were just obsessed with, like a boy band, or, not that boy bands were huge.
Yeah.
But-
And I've thought about this question, and maybe for some people there were, there were a lot of, you always have your, for girls, teen idols,
Yeah.
whether it be an actor or a band or,
Yeah.
but I never really was obsessed like Lacey was with One Direction.
Right.
Complete obsession with One Direction, and I never was like that.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was pretty open to all different genres of music, and there wasn't really one that I was completely obsessed over. I mean, I really liked Michael Jackson. Just he was
Who didn't?
amazing,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say it was like an obsession or a crush or anything like that. It was more just, it was new and exciting,
And the talent.
the talent, absolutely. So I can't really say that there's like one band I was ever obsessed with, because I had so many different genres in my life, and I just liked everything. And I still am that way. I still just like everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, and really quick, if you guys haven't, if you want to get to know Lacey, definitely go back and listen to our 4th episode, and you can learn about her obsession with One Direction and how,
And Ariana Grande.
right, and
Oh, yeah,
Ariana
that's
Grande.
right, yeah.
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 When she gets hooked on a band, she really dives in. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Alrighty. So I guess another question that we have on here to talk about, it says to ask you about Metallica and metal music.
Yeah. So that's kind of a funny thing, because when I was in high school and we used to go to dances or mostly like parties, gatherings, me and my girlfriends would go, and maybe it might be a bunch of guys there, as and Metallica was always playing. And me and my girlfriends were like, oh my gosh, do we have to listen to this again? Like, it was just so loud and obnoxious. But, after we went to 2 or 3 parties and Metallica was always playing,
Yeah.
then it was like, then we started singing along, and and pretty soon it was like, this is awesome. We love this. And of course, my sister especially was a big Metallica fan, huge. And she was always into the heavier metal type rock. And so that's what was always playing when we would hang out as well, was the heart of Metallica, Megadeth, things like that. And they are just absolutely amazing. The drummer, I had a couple of friends, brothers actually, in high school, and they had this natural talent. They could listen to a song. They both played the guitar and the drums, and they could listen to a song and then go sit down, figure it out, and play it.
Yeah.
And they could do that with Metallica. And I always thought that was amazing, because not a lot of people can
Well, yeah.
play that kind of music.
Yeah.
And
I wish I could do that.
Yeah, and they were just absolutely amazing that way. Very talented. So, yeah, those bands, like, at first, I didn't like them, I guess, but it didn't take long, and I was in love, especially with Metallica. I never really got into other metal bands, but Metallica was insane.
Yeah.
It was so good.
What other metal bands do you remember being big at that time? Like, I'm sure Black Sabbath was still big.
Yeah, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest.
Yeah.
Trying to think.
Behemoth, Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and even, let's see, what year would that have been? Tool, I know, came out.
Oh, yeah, Tool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In the
Which
90s.
Well,
I
like,
think
I
it's
want to say late
80s.
80s
Yeah,
is what I'm thinking.
I think you're right there.
Rush.
Oh, Rush was
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah. And it's funny because I tend to put Rush, like, it wasn't my favorite band, but all the guys that I was friends with loved Rush. So I always, because the guys loved it, I always think it's more of a guy band, Like,
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. But they are so good.
I think you're right, though. I think they are kind of a guy band.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess we want to talk about, there's all these big metal bands, and then going into, after the 80s, I guess we're into the 90s, the evolution of music. Did it change? Did it decline? Or is it still declining? Or
Right.
how would you say the evolution of that from the 80s to the 90s worked out?
And this is just my opinion. I know there's so many people that just absolutely love 90s music. And there are some good ones like Nirvana, of
Yes,
course.
yeah. Mhm.
There are some good ones. But because of what I was going through during the time, I was actually listening more to country during, say, 90 to 94-ish. It was definitely more a lot of country. And I'm talking like older country, you know,
Well-
Hank Williams Jr., Dwight Yoakam, some of the much older country. And I would have to say the reason for that is because I call them girly singers. And when you turn on the radio, what you would hear is the girly singers. And I'm like, maybe like Mariah Carey, Brandy,
Right.
those kinds of, and it wasn't my favorite type of music.
Yeah.
And so, but I was also listening to country during the time, so it didn't really matter. But then in the later 90s, when boy bands and Britney Spears and, you know,
Shakira or something like that.
yeah, like, yeah, that, so I was listening to that in the later 90s. Will Smith.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
You know.
yeah, he
It was
was
pretty
pretty
big
in the
for a
90s
while.
too.
Yeah, in the late 90s. So, you know, I loved that music in the later 90s. I just wasn't really into the more pop and rock in the earlier 90s. And I know there's a lot of bands that people are obsessed with from that time period, but it just wasn't something that I got into, I guess,
Yeah.
at that time.
Well, and country kind of had a heyday in the 90s, you know, like it got pretty popular,
Yeah.
I feel like. There was a lot of really good country singers during that time.
The Judds and the, like, yeah, there was a lot of country music.
Good country,
Mhm.
yeah. So I can
sure.
see why you gravitated to that,
And
you know, just because of your music taste and, you know, yeah.
And country was always a big part of my life because my dad really liked country. And it was older country like Don Williams and Roger Miller and that kind of stuff. And also when I was listening to country, I was also listening to like Jimmy Buffett and things like that. Like there's definitely been an influence from all areas in my life. I
Yeah.
can still hear a Jimmy Buffett song and it takes me back, and because he's amazing.
Well, and you can definitely see that, like, you know, when you're describing the artists that you like and your musical taste, like it's very much just the whole spectrum, which is really cool. This is one of the reasons we wanted to interview you. So
yeah. Well, and then there's Joel Walsh. We listened to Joel Walsh during that time a
And the
lot as well,
Eagles
and the Eagles. Oh yes.
So
Yes.
good. And, you know, I guess while we're on the spectrum of music, one thing that I really have wanted to ask you, and I've kind of talked to you about it, but how do you feel about hip hop and rap? And, you know, how did you feel about it when it first came out in like the late 80s?
Yeah. So the first time I had ever heard about rap music, I want to say I was about between 12 and 14. So it would have been like 82 to 84. And I had a friend who's had family in Hawaii, and she started to explain to me how there was this thing called rap music.
Yeah.
And they would take records and, you know,
Scratch
the records to get that sound. And it was just completely foreign to me. I remember thinking, why? Like, why would they want that, you know? But then right away after that is when rap music started being incorporated. And I come, you know, from a very, like, conservative state. It was probably bigger, faster in some of the bigger cities, you know, maybe California, Florida, whatever.
Yeah.
New York, where rap music kind of hit the scene a lot sooner than it did in Utah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
And so Utah was kind of late on that boat.
I think so too.
But it definitely did, you know, when they started Aerosmith and Run DMC.
Right.
Yeah.
And they started incorporating rap music into rock or pop or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's when I really became familiar with it.
Yeah.
I never did go down, like, I know 90s rap. I love 90s rap now, but when it was the 90s, it was still a little foreign to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't really listen to it much then, other than like Tone Loc or Run DMC, those kind of.
Yeah. Beastie Boys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I know I'm more familiar with 90s rap now than I was then.
Right.
So.
Right.
And so I guess kind of also going with that, you know, talking about genre mixing with rap and rock and pop and all that stuff. How did you kind of take, you know, that because that's when new metal was starting to hit the scene and everything. How did you take to that? I know you said you didn't like it, some of rap at first. Were you the same with new metal then, or?
Yeah, so new metal is another one that I'm not that familiar with. However, Linkin Park
Yeah.
is one of it. And I know if you've listened to their episode on Linkin Park, it's my favorite. Like it hits me, the passion that comes from it. It's amazing. And I feel very proud that I was the one that introduced Ryan to Linkin Park.
I'm so glad you did.
Because Linkin Park is amazing and they're kind of a mixture. But as far as that new metal, it's not, I don't know, what would you consider new metal, you guys?
Oh gosh. I mean, Linkin Park is a great example. They started out in new metal.
I mean, we also talked about System of a Down.
Yes.
Yeah, they were really good too. Some of the
Korn could be considered new metal too.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm familiar with those bands, but it's not something I got into. Probably because at that time in my life, I was going back to my roots, which was the 80s.
Yeah.
And so during that time when that all came out, I was listening to
Queen,
or Depeche Mode, or just Frankie Goes to Hollywood, like those kinds of bands I was revisiting at that time. So new metal, I would say, did not have a big influence on my life other than Linkin Park.
Right. Well, and I think that's probably common for people from your generation, because new metal was, I mean, Nick and I have already kind of talked about it. Like, there's some really good new metal out there from back in the 90s and things, but
then there's other ones where people are like, they're kind of ashamed, that they listen to that stuff too.
Right.
Right,
And it was just kind of an awkward stage in music. Like, it was like a teenage stage in music.
Yeah, I agree.
Something like that. So still developing, but that's really cool. And thanks for plugging our Linkin Park episode. If you haven't heard that
my
one,
favorite.
go listen to it.
My favorite.
It's our most listened to episode. So.
And then also, I guess, along with late 80s and into the 90s, there was MTV. How was growing up with that?
Oh, well, so I don't know if you guys know this, but MTV started out as music television, but it was played like on a Friday or Saturday night at midnight.
Oh, okay.
And so there wasn't, it wasn't a whole channel or anything like that. It wasn't like an hour show at midnight. And there weren't that many videos out at that time. Music videos were really new. And so the ones I first remember watching is Aha.
Oh, okay.
Take on
So
Me,
cool.
which was the most amazing ahead of its time video.
Yeah.
And like Michael Jackson Thriller, I remember there was a big, huge release for that video because it was 15 minutes long. It was like a short movie, and we all just waited and waited for that because they had announced it's coming out. Waited for that to come out and sat down in front of the TVs. That was like probably before remote controls and things like that. But, those kind of music videos. And then as time went on, everybody started making music videos. And so then they had to create a whole channel. So MTV used to be all music videos.
Right.
And then after that, it kind of evolved into, reality TV, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it kind of changed.
It changed. They stopped doing, and there was another channel called VH1.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
I never really watched it much, but I remember it.
And MTV kind of became almost like a risque kind of thing, like probably not appropriate for young children, that kind of showing on it. But it seems like VH1 stuck more to just playing music videos, and it was probably more appropriate for kids, I guess. But MTV started out not as a channel, but as just a TV show.
And I feel like they started bringing on, because MTV, they tried to start getting the newest artists and the more like, I don't know, shock artists, or like, stuff that really caught people's attention in the music world, and they'd bring them on and interview them, and they'd start doing kind of like weird, I don't know, it just got a little weird as it went on.
It
not
really
that
did, in my opinion, too.
Yeah, like, not that I know a whole lot about it, but it's interesting that it went from like this kind of a music video TV channel and it turned into something very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that happened. I don't remember when it happened exactly, but maybe that happened as videos came available on other sources.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They tried to
YouTube
start doing...
or I don't know if that.
I mean, I never really
if it
got
was
into
for
music
that.
videos till YouTube.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump back to Michael Jackson really quick because I feel like
Yes.
we should definitely talk about him and his influence in your life, and maybe start with like the Jackson 5 and how he kind of broke off and did his own thing.
Yeah, so I mean I remember hearing Jackson 5 when I was young, but it wasn't like it wasn't an obsession, they just were on the radio. But it wasn't until Michael Jackson came out, and like back then music was very, I mean, there were always, I don't know if you've seen the movie Rock of Ages.
I don't think so.
No, I haven't.
Well, so it's about rock music, and you've got the people who kind of work in the bars and are just their whole lives kind of revolve around rock music and bands. But then you've got kind of the other side. Catherine Zeta-Jones plays more of a, like the mayor's wife, very religious, and they're always picketing the people that are, because back then it was kind of like lyrics and stuff,
Kind of
very
like
taboo. Religious people, were like, people are going to do bad things if they listen to these lyrics. And that's kind of what it was like back in the 70s and 80s.
So it's kind of like a Footloose situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when Michael Jackson came out, the music was absolutely amazing. But they would show him on TV. They would have, I don't really remember, maybe it was in a music award show. I don't really remember the actual content, but he would perform. And, he used to grab himself a lot.
Oh, yeah, so they probably film him above the waist. Like
Well,
with Elvis,
they
right?
didn't
Oh,
at
really?
the time, but it was risque. And I remember a lot of my friends' parents were like, oh, don't watch that.
Yeah.
My mom wasn't like that because she just liked music, and it wasn't,
Wasn't a huge deal.
wasn't a huge deal. Which is probably the reason why I'm so open to all kinds of music.
Yeah.
I think music is for fun. I don't think it influences people in that way,
Right,
that
right.
they would, I mean, it might some people, I don't know.
I
But
think
yeah,
it's-
Michael Jackson was very risque at first because of his dancing,
Yeah.
and a lot of people didn't want their kids watching him and things like that, but his music was amazing. He is
was
so talented.
unbelievable.
He
Even
was
today.
so
He was
talented.
a musical genius for sure.
He really was, and I think he was also just very innocent and kind of in a bubble. So he
Yeah.
wasn't,
It was all he knew.
It was
right?
all he
Yeah.
knew. It literally was all he knew, and he was kept sheltered, and just his talent was the only thing he had,
Yeah.
But yeah, Michael Jackson was an amazing.
Hey Ryan, what are you doing this weekend?
Yeah, man. I'm hanging out with McKay. We're going to take a look at his latest engravings and talk about giveaways for I Engrave stuff.
Oh yeah, that's awesome, especially about those giveaways. And I was on the internet the other day and I saw these ads for these other engraving services, and man, their prices are expensive.
Yeah, man. A lot of those other engraving companies will charge you up the wazoo for things. But I've noticed that McKay's company, they have items that are priced very reasonably, making it affordable, especially this year, to get a personalized and really impactful gift. Get your parents something that is heartfelt with your signature, or you can even do a letter in your own handwriting on something.
Oh yeah, that's right, and you can even send a scan of your handwriting on a letter, and they can engrave it onto a sign, a bottle, or whatever you could think of. The possibilities are endless with them.
Yeah, and right now, if you're in the checkout area, you can type in TP10 in all caps in the promo code box, and you'll get an extra 10% off. A gift from us. Go to iengravestuff.com today. And then, sorry, I'm going to take another question here. So one thing that we wanted to ask you about that has kind of been a recent event, how did you feel about the Super Bowl halftime show?
I didn't even watch that, so I don't know what's going on with the halftime.
So it was Shakira and J-Lo.
Okay.
And to me, it was amazing. Like, these ladies are my age.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing things. I mean, J-Lo was on a pole, for instance, and I think that was because she did the movie Hustler.
Oh.
And
I think I remember hearing about this.
and
Everybody thought it was very risque and everything.
it was very, yeah.
Yeah.
But because dance and music has been such a huge part of my life, I thought their show was amazing. And I just tell people, like, at my age, if I could dance on a pole or shake my hips like Shakira, then I totally would.
Right.
I gotcha.
So even though, some people thought it was very risque and taboo, I guess, that's not my opinion. My younger girls dance, and anything with dance in it, I'm kind of obsessed with. I love watching dance and incorporate music, and I think it's awesome, amazing.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated by it.
Yeah, I had to put you on the spot and ask you about that one because I was curious what you had thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess we'll also, for this next question, we'll go back a little bit farther about the Beatles. What did you think about them growing up and listening to them, and also about the Beatles after they broke up and their solo careers? Did you ever follow those? And
Yes. So the Beatles were always a huge part of my life. My mom loved the Beatles, obsessed with them. And I went through different stages in my life where that's all I would listen to because I love their music. It's very, I don't know the right word, but it's almost like alternative in a way. Some of their later music, not their earlier
popular stuff, but
bubblegum kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But later it's almost like their Yellow Submarine and Sgt. Pepper's and stuff. It's almost has an alternative feel, and I love alternative music. And so the Beatles definitely had a big influence in my life. I listened to them a lot. And then their solo careers, my mom loved Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
Loved him. Still does, I think, to this day.
Oh, yes.
But I tend, he was more the influence, I think, of almost the bubblegum kind of Beatles feel.
Yeah, when it
whereas
came to,
like John Lennon was more
serious.
Yeah, and I tend to like the John Lennon part of the music more.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I really liked John Lennon. So
I think I'm with you
music.
there. Like, Imagine that. Like, that's an
Yes.
amazing song.
Oh, yes.
So deep and.
It's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I always loved the mixture of both because I remember when I took music history. I can't remember if it was my high school course or college course, one of the two. We talked about the writing styles of John Lennon and Paul McCartney and how they kind of mesh together. Like if you listen to, what was the song? Ticket to Ride.
Yeah.
Or you hear the part where it's very fun, before she's going too fast. That part was written by Paul McCartney. And you can tell because it's very fun, fast, and upbeat. And then the slow part's like, I think she's gonna be sad.
Yep.
That's more smooth and melodic. That's John Lennon.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to see how much they complemented each other.
Absolutely.
And I'm very sad that, that John Lennon, he was shot and was killed. They never got a chance to.
I remember that day.
Yeah.
When that happened.
Yeah, that they never got that chance to recollab with each other in the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would have been amazing.
Very tragic, and I don't know.
I mean, they wouldn't be the Beatles without each other.
Right.
And they're both just different, but so amazing and combined so well together.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that it was when they were together that was the
really
best.
shone,
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. So we had kind of talked about how some of the big, well-known bands kind of affected you. I was hoping you could go into a little more detail about that, though. Like, growing up, like, what bands do you remember just changed everything? Because there were so many bands that did that, during the 80s especially.
Oh, that's a kind of a hard question. I mean, again, I think it depends on the genre you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because big hair bands changed everything in the rock world. You know what I mean?
So true.
And now it's like, who listens to big hair bands anymore?
I love Bon Jovi, but
Well, Bon Jovi is a classic, and he's still around, and he still produces, puts out amazing music.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as revisiting the big hair band days, there's not a lot of music besides maybe Def Leppard and Bon Jovi.
Oh, yeah.
That I would probably revisit.
Yeah.
Maybe Rat.
Okay.
If you know Rat, maybe. But I'm thinking Cinderella and what's another one? anyway, like I don't think I would revisit those again.
Yeah.
Although they were awesome in the day,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a few that are classic that, you know, I have heard and listened to again later.
Right, even now. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't know, alternative music in the 80s and even alternative music now, there's a lot of in the, you know, say the past 15 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of alternative music that I really like. I don't The Neighborhood. I like
yeah.
The Neighborhood.
Yeah, really good.
You know, they play, I don't know, what genre would you consider The Weeknd?
Gosh, that's a tough question, actually.
Well, I've never really listened to them much myself, but so I really couldn't say.
You know, part of me wants to say pop, part of me wants to say R&B, part of me wants to say alternative.
Yeah.
You know, so
it's a combination, and like
Right.
I really like The Weeknd because I tend to. I mean, they have a definite like alternative undertone
some
feel.
of them, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that alternative music, just in general, I had the most influence in my life
Yeah.
because it was really prominent in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's kind of when.
That's when it came out. I would say.
Yeah, well, like kind of the genre mixing type stuff, you know,
Yeah.
the kind of just different and out there music.
There was also a genre, I guess, called new wave in the
Yeah.
80s.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And it actually started, I believe, in Britain,
Okay.
new wave, and then it kind of eventually showed itself around here because I think it actually started in the 70s in Britain, but it didn't really come around here until probably the 80s.
I think yeah, like I haven't done a whole lot of it, but you know, another person who brought this up was Jordan in our last episode. He was talking about how he would love to take some of the best qualities of new wave music.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
make an album from it, which I
Yeah.
thought was very creative and but yeah, like so I'm aware of that time period, but I haven't studied up on it much.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was big in the 80s, but it was kind of it was just kind of everywhere in the 80s. So it's like, to me, I don't know what I would specify as new wave versus you know, a different genre, because it was kind of a mix.
Kind of the line kind of blurred.
Yeah, the
there.
line blurred, definitely. For me, anyway.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, here, do you want to? I feel like I've been taking all the
No,
questions.
you're all good, man. I'm as long as it flows good. But I guess maybe one to talk about growing up with the radio and mainstream music, and also we talked a little bit about dances, but maybe touch a little bit more on, you know, back in the 80s and 90s and going to dances and things that just how, because radio was big back then.
Yes.
But I personally, I don't care much for the radio. I'd rather listen to what I'd rather be the DJ rather than someone else, you know, turn on the radio and they decide what goes on next.
Right.
and all of my kids are that way because that's how they grew up. I grew up with the radio, so I tend to, when I get in the car, you know, I'll flip stations on the radio still. I don't always plug in my phone. It's just not what I do, because I was used to listening to the radio or plugging in a cassette or a CD or whatever, you know, it happened to be at that time.
Yeah.
So all of my kids, they get in the car and they're plugging in their phones and playing their playlist, which is fine with me because, like, I love their music as well. But it's just not something I do when I get in the car because I've always just listened to the radio. I do it more when I'm on vacation and I'm traveling, and you can't get radio stations when you're out in the middle of nowhere. So I definitely do it when I'm traveling.
Well, and did you ever like call in and to win tickets?
Absolutely, I even won a couple of times.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
that's pretty awesome.
What tickets did you win?
Well, I'm trying to remember what I won. I remember one time I was really young and we were listening to the radio at home, and they asked a question about some old guy. I don't even remember who it was, but my dad knew the answer. And he's blurted it out, and he's like, "Call. That's the answer." And so I called and gave him the answer and won. I don't even remember what I won, but it was exciting.
Right.
I was on the radio.
And I mean, they still do stuff like that today on the radio, but it doesn't
It was way bigger back then.
Yeah, it's not the same impact as it used to be.
Yeah.
Like, that used to be the only way for you to, I don't know, interact with the radio station and with artists, and you get to, I don't know, it was just so different.
Absolutely, yeah. Good times.
Yeah. I think I miss him sometimes. Like, I don't know. I grew up with a little bit of the radio and, but I think I was a teenager when the iPod came out and everything. And it was just
No,
like,
Ryan, it was the Zune.
oh, right.
Oh yeah, I remember because I wanted an iPod. I remember Ryan was so proud of his Zune. So I was like, "What's a Zune?"
What's a Zune? Now it's like, what was a Zune?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like an 8-track.
I'm going to come to the Zune's defense here just for a minute. Let me explain. So
So have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy 2? You know,
oh,
like it's what everybody on Earth's listening to now. Gonna hold like 200 songs.
oh man.
But those
I'm that guy.
But those were good times. Like, that's one of the things I'm talking about. Music brings people together. Is Ryan used to be on the computer, which was in our kitchen dining area, and he used to sit on the computer and play songs that he could put on his Zune. And so it was just every day after school, between then and dinner time, just music going on in the kitchen dining area. And it was like Hoobastank and
Oh yeah, I loved Hoobastank. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of One Republic was another one.
Yeah.
They were
Apologize.
Love One Republic.
They're really
I just
good.
saw them in concert last year? The year before?
I think it was 2 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah, super good. And so talented.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like that was just good times because he was a rebel teenager and
Scoundrel.
Rebel.
and so it probably wasn't the time in our life that we were getting along the best, but the music brought us together and closer. So
I think so too. And I still am going to come back to the Zune because this is the reason I wanted the Zune, okay? For all of you people out there freaking out right now. So when the iPod first came out, you'll remember maybe that it had a little click wheel and, it had a screen and you had to use the
I
click
was sad
wheel.
when the click wheel disappeared.
I know. I loved the click wheel. But the Zune had an actual screen. Like you could watch videos and whereas the original iPod you couldn't do that. Like it had a screen but you could only listen to music.
Yep.
And the Zune you could watch music videos, you could listen to the radio. Like it was just a better, I don't know. In my opinion, it was a better way to listen to music at the time.
Yeah.
It didn't last very long. Apple
Nope.
kind of took over, but
yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, there was nothing wrong with the Zune. It's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
I think it's funny too, though. I just had to justify it.
But yeah, Apple was where it was at.
Yeah, I'll admit, I agree.
And still is.
I rock an iPhone now. I have a MacBook Pro. I've got an iPad.
Yep.
I'm decked
Apple
out.
Watch.
I have an Apple Watch.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, and I guess our next question is, what do you think of concept albums?
Ryan and we just talked about concept albums and I'm like, what the heck is a concept album?
Oh.
But he explained it to me. And I guess if you go back to the Beatles, it would have been like Sgt. Pepper's, right?
Yeah, that was the
Right,
first one.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like I say, like I'm not an expert on any band or their members or their albums because I grew up with radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I would hear the popular ones. And if I liked that, I'd go buy their album. But like concept albums, I had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
So I can't really say that much about concept albums in general.
So like,
I know I've listened to them, but I never knew that.
You could
It was
listen from
Yeah.
1 to 12, and it tells a whole.
And it tells a
concept
story. And I never knew
yeah.
that until Ryan told me.
I
Like,
gotcha.
but, Pink Floyd, like The Wall,
Yeah.
is one of my all-time favorites. I love that album. I've just never heard the word concept album put to it, I guess.
yeah.
I gotcha.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about because, like, I know that album affected you, and
Yes, like I know on one of your other episodes you talked about The Wall and some of the words in it and
Oh,
the silly
yeah.
voices and
Oh yeah.
and that and that kind of thing.
Nick does a great impression of the meat.
Yes, he does. He does. For sure.
Oh, you! If you don't eat your meat,
Exactly.
you can't have any pudding.
You can't have any pudding.
I like it when he does it way better than when I do it.
But yeah, that was just an amazing album. So as far as concept albums, that would be top of my list because now I know it's one.
I got you. Oh, that's a great one for sure.
Yeah, we wanted to ask you that because I just thought it was so interesting that, like, you know, because I know how much you love music and everything, and you know, the whole concept album kind of being a little foreign to you, like, but it makes sense back then when those albums were coming out. I mean, people probably didn't listen to that and go, oh my gosh, like this is so conceptual, and you know, they were probably just so into it and wanted to be a part of it. Like I don't know.
And then also now that those albums have been out for decades now, people have been able to dissect them and really study them and be like, oh yeah, I can see this, and get ideas from it. And
well, and I think that's the difference between our generations is now people do that. They dissect music and, you know, take it apart and like really get into it. Whereas back then we just listened to it, you know, like this is a cool song, you know, like it wasn't like we were tearing it apart. Is it fun to dance to? Is it fun to listen to at parties? Is it fun? You know, it was more of a social thing and we're listening to it.
Yeah, being there in the moment.
Yeah.
And now there's weirdos out there making podcasts about it and
Gosh,
stuff.
no
Like,
kidding. What the heck?
yeah, Brian. He dragged me into this, so he's the winner.
Oh yeah. Put it all on me, the Zune guy.
The Zoom guy.
The Zoom guy.
That's what we're gonna call you from now on.
Oh boy, I can see the comments now. Let's see. So I know that we've kind of brought this up a little bit, but I was hoping you could maybe give us a little more detail here, like when certain genres came out, like the grunge genre, or well, I'll save that for my next question. I wanted to talk to you about disco music, but
Yep, that was definitely a genre.
Yeah. So, but like as new genres came out and you were experiencing them for the first time, like did they just kind of slowly trickle in and become what music was, or were you like, oh my gosh, this sounds so different, you know?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, like I remember the first time I heard Depeche Mode, and I'm like, this is so depressing.
This is a downer.
This is, you know what I mean? But it became part of my life, and then I started to understand it and listen to it and enjoy it. The same with metal, you know.
Yeah.
It took a minute, like, to go like, okay, do I love this or do I hate this? You know, it took a minute to really get to know what it was about.
Yeah, it's kind of like in shock, like with the new...
and hip hop, same sort of thing. Like, it was just new, and so it took a while. Like I had to hear it a few times because the beats were different than I was used to.
Yeah,
and so I know a lot of younger people can sing along with rap music just fine, and I cannot because I don't have that. The beat is completely different.
Yeah, like the flow.
The flow of it is completely different. And so even though I like it, and there are some that I try to sing along with, because singing along with music is big for me. I like to sing along. But yeah, just the flow and the beat and everything is so different that like rap music I can't. But I know young people can kill it.
Right.
You know, because maybe that's what they are used to listening to. And so yeah, like I think the way, you know, like the electronic music and the new wave, like it all has a different sort of feel, a different flow, and it took some time, a little bit of time to kind of get used to that before you're like, ooh, I really like this, you know? Yeah. So.
Yeah, and so I guess also kind of going along with that, there's also a new, I guess you can say, genre of rock that's called progressive rock. Have you heard much about that? Or?
Just from Ryan.
Well,
like
sense,
I've heard the term. What would you consider a progressive rock band?
Okay.
Well, I would say definitely the biggest one out there today is Periphery.
I've never even heard of them.
Yeah, they're not even
No offense.
No, they're definitely very unique, and what I find is great about them is that they're not even signed. They're self-produced out there. They're the biggest, progressive rock band out there. And basically, it's just heavy distorted guitars going dun 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 dun.
Okay, okay.
And just it's very precise rather than where you maybe if you have like punk rock where it's just 3 chords and and a melody. It's very focused on the instrumentation.
Yeah, okay.
And the drums are very in particular, a lot of double bass.
Okay.
And it's basically just taking rock by storm and kind of reviving rock a little bit, I would say as well.
Yeah.
They use like certain time scales, like, for the people that play instruments, I think it kind of affects them a lot because they listen to it and they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they're doing this in this time scale and this, like the beats and the way that they set up their songs and how precise everything is. And other bands that you might have grown up with, like Tool would be a great example, and that's definitely one of my favorite bands.
I would definitely say that they would be more influencers and pioneers of progressive rock.
Yeah.
Gosh, why is the name escaping me right now? But yeah, like, and Rush would probably be a good example of, kind of a progressive rock band.
Very early progressive rock. Because
Yeah.
today's progressive rock is a lot heavier than I would say Rush.
Rushes.
Tool, I would say, is closer to it, but it's definitely very hard, very distorted. And it's very also sometimes common for progressive rock bands today where they don't have a bassist, they have 8-string guitars.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
like just
There's
crazy.
Just amazing musical geniuses out there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That it just blows my mind, and I can't even comprehend how they put those things together.
Yeah, like if I were to describe it, it's more take like a classically trained musician who plays in an orchestra or a jazz band and take that and mix in rock with it, heavy metal rock with it.
Yeah.
So like they're very classically trained musicians, but they just have that distorted sound that is not very typical of rock and roll.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to check it out. I mean,
and if they do have vocals, they're all about just screamo.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
well, sometimes they do have clean vocals, but just screamo is a lot more common.
And it depends.
When you say mixing, when you say mixing classical and rock, the only thing that comes to mind that I'm familiar with is when Metallica played with the orchestra.
Yeah.
Was it
so good?
the
Which is probably not the
Trans-Siberian
same
Orchestra, right? Yeah.
But it's probably not the same sound.
No,
but it was amazing and worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah.
King Crimson was the other progressive metal band that I was trying to think of. Yeah, and I mean they're kind of. It seems like a lot of those progressive metal and progressive rock bands from your time period are not really well known today.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I was going to say is, just they would do unique things that nobody else would do with music. Like some of the things that Pink Floyd did with some of their songs, even more bizarre than that. They would just do very weird time scales. And so, to the average listener, it probably wouldn't sound like it wouldn't be a catchy song necessarily, something that you could sing along to all the time.
Well, and I mean, kind of on that subject, Queen was very innovative that way too. And I love Queen. They're, musical geniuses.
Oh,
because
for
we were
sure.
talking about that. Queen was definitely.
I mean, just look at Bohemian Rhapsody.
Exactly.
So.
I love Queen. In fact, I was listening to the Queen on the way over here. So.
Oh, getting inspired, huh?
I guess so.
Another question we've got. So how do you like the streaming services now? Because that's the main form, the main way to listen to music now. What's your preferred streaming service? Apple Music, Spotify?
So I have Apple Music, our family. So I tend to go to that more. Before I got Apple Music, because I've only had it for maybe a year, if that, it was Spotify that I go to. And I quite like Spotify. Just because I like how you can kind of type in somebody that you like, and it'll play music
that's like it.
Yeah.
Which is, like Pandora was that way, and things like that. But I quite like Spotify. But again, it goes back to the radio thing. Like if I'm at home on my computer, I might turn on Spotify or Apple Music, one of the two. But in the car, like I don't tend to do that. It's the radio. But I think it's great. The kids love it. That's how all of my kids listen to music, is through streaming services and that kind of thing. And I think it's great. Like the radio, it's full of commercials, and you don't get to pick what you listen to, and all that kind of thing. So it's great that way. But I guess I'm kind of old fashioned in that way too, that I just click on the radio and change stations till I find something I like.
Old fashioned in the best way, I think. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're getting pretty close on time, but there's one other question we wanted to ask you. I guess we'll have Ryan ask this one, but
Oh, which one here?
this one right there.
Oh, yes. What was it like watching me grow up, and, the music that I listened to, and, just like being an onlooker as, someone is growing up and slowly discovering everything?
Yeah.
Like, what was that like?
Well, I mean, and again, I think I had a big influence in that, because sometimes you were just stuck in the back seat and listening to whatever I was listening to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you went through stages of, like, when you were 4 and 5, I was listening to NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and you thought they were so cool,
Right.
They were awesome, So it was definitely, music's always been a big part of our life. As we drive in the car, we always have music on. We're always singing. So, but it's fun to watch how things have developed with you, and introducing you to Linkin Park. I think you were probably only 7.
Yeah.
I don't know what you thought about that at the time, like,
Right.
but it ultimately became one of your favorites.
Oh my gosh, so good.
So
Yeah.
good, but then there was also other influences in the time of our life as well. Like, I mean, I'm talking driving and listening to Marilyn Manson. Like, how did that affect your brain as a child? I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Explains a couple questions for me.
Exactly. And then, you kind of like the thing in the kitchen with the Zune,
Right.
and the music you were listening to, that, and you were so passionate about music and looking it up and wanting certain music on your device, and being a part of that was just, it was fun to watch. And then as you got older and started driving, and the music that influenced you at that time, namely Eminem.
Yeah, I got into hip hop pretty bad.
Can you still recite all of the words?
Oh yeah.
to what is it?
Oh, Rap God.
Rap God.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could do that.
I may or not rap every word to that song when it comes on in the car.
May or may not. Exactly. I'm pretty sure it's the
May.
the May. Yeah. Yeah, because I remember my wall in my bedroom and bathroom, it was against his, and so I remember standing in my bathroom getting ready for bed or whatever, and listening to him rap God on the other side of the wall, over and over, trying to get all the lyrics down.
Took a long time.
It
That's a hard
did.
song to rap.
It is.
So-
And it was amazing. And then he'd come and show me, like,
Oh,
check it out, I got it.
Like, I've already heard it 18 times in my bedroom.
Exactly. So, it was fun to watch. And now I'm still doing it with my younger kids, watching them go through changes in music. At first, they're young. At first, it was all pop, but now it's starting more. They're starting to go into junior high and having more influence music-wise in their life, and it's always fun to watch for me.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what my little sisters get into, and what they think about music as they get older.
Yeah, right now Ariel likes to listen to like musical kind of music.
And musicals are fun music too.
And she has a huge variety of genres she listens to as well. I mean, for her age, I guess. But musicals, I find that fascinating that she's kind of picked some musicals that she likes. And,
We want to do an episode on musicals here.
Yeah, I would love to.
Down the road. Yeah, Nick is itching to do that. So.
Yeah.
I was a theater kid, so.
Yeah, she found one. It's called Six.
Six. I don't think I've even heard
It's
of that
about
Oh, yes. It's about a
Henry
king.
VIII.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
Henry
his
VIII,
6
okay.
wives.
one.
But they did it in a pop music type play.
Oh,
So the
interesting.
6 wives are explaining their stories through pop music. And so she's really into that right now.
Oh, cool.
Well, and she'll actually make like little animations and things to the songs,
To
which
the
is
songs, which is
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah, it's so
Oh, wow.
cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, she's very talented. I'm excited to see where both of my littlest sisters go, and Lacey too. And
Yep.
you know,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
but let's see, another question we have here, and I think we had kind of already asked you, but you know, a lot of people say that after the 80s, music started declining, that it, you know, particularly rock has been in decline since, aside from maybe like the grunge era with Nirvana. But do you feel like music is still declining now?
I think it has its moments. It's definitely my opinion that it started to decline after the 80s as
Yeah.
well. But then you have bands like Linkin Park, like that's not a decline, you know? So I think it kind of, there's really good bands, and then it's kind of a roller coaster since the 90s, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, you can always find good music that you like, depending on your tastes, no matter what time period it is. You can always find something, I believe. But just in general, you know, I think that it probably has been on more of a decline since the 80s.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's because it's become more accessible? Like that, you know, it's there's more musicians out there. There's more ways to listen to music.
Absolutely. And I mean, it used to be you had to be discovered to
Yeah.
be a band, but now, like Lacey, for instance, she loves looking up and finding the most rare band or music that's just starting out, and she loves supporting those bands.
Yeah.
Well, that's really awesome, though.
which is great, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people like that as well. Where back in the day, you had to be discovered, you know,
Yeah.
and really like sneak tapes into producers.
Radio stations and things like that.
Exactly. But now, you know, it's so open to pretty much anyone, especially like with YouTube, because anybody can post. I think that's how Justin Bieber was.
Yeah, he was through YouTube.
Yeah, through YouTube. And so I think there's just a lot of access to anybody,
Yeah.
you know, coming up with music, where before it wasn't like that. It was just really, you had to be discovered. You had to have talent. They were looking for some certain thing, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of my theory behind it all too. Is, you know, I think it's just because it's so much more accessible now.
Yeah.
You know, all
Well,
of it,
and there's a lot of talent out there.
Yeah.
Like, so much talent. It's kind of the same, like in the dance. Like, there's so many dancers.
Yeah.
That it would be hard to support yourself being a dancer.
Right.
And now it's kind of the same, I think, with music.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of talent out there, and so it's a hard thing to support yourself with
And get big on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially since the way that musicians who do make it and make their living off of music has changed from what it used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be from, you know, sales, but now that streaming services, and you pay like $6.99 a month and listen to all those songs.
Yeah.
Musicians don't make money that way anymore.
Right.
They make money off of touring and merch and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting how things have evolved.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and I guess we'll go into our closing question and just kind of wrap everything around, I guess, is how music has changed your life and what does it mean to you?
Music is everything to me. So I mean, kind of the main point of music for me is that it brings people together. And it maybe, you know, you might meet somebody because of music that you both enjoy and base a friendship off of that, you know, to get to know each other. Or, you know, it's great in a family, you know, like I say with Ryan, when he was going through a stage as a teenager, the music is what I think brought us together. And I am on my third marriage, And so I went through a lot of things like with divorce, and my children have been through divorce, and divorce can be a trauma in a child's life. And I think that music, going back and, it can bring up feelings that you've had, it can bring up back lots of memories. So just music in general has had such a huge influence on my life. And, everybody that I've met, had some kind of relationship with, a friendship, whatever, I have learned something from them about music. It was, a friend that I worked with that introduced me she was much younger than me, but she introduced me to Linkin Park. That's when I started listening to it, and that's when Ryan started listening to it. So just music in general, to me, just has been a huge influence in my life. It is my life.
Well, and I think that people out there listening can hear that. And, that's why we brought you on. There's so many more questions that we wanted to ask you, like, what you think about Billie Eilish and,
she's amazing.
Yeah.
Just, so unique. And
yeah, and we wanted to ask you, what you think about Dave's Grohl relationship with Billie Eilish. I mean, there's so many things here about. I wanted to talk to you about Grey Days and Linkin Park, and how Grey Days is kind of reviving Chester by bringing out a new album, and
yes.
There's so many more questions.
And hearing that for the first time was so emotional for me, just because of.
Their new single, Sickness.
Yeah, their new single, Grey Days.
Yeah.
And hearing his voice again, and hearing it like it used to be.
Right.
Yeah. Which is when I first started liking Linkin Park.
Yeah.
That was the sound in his voice. And he's so emotional, and like you can just hear what he's been through his voice. It just absolutely amazing. The Grey Days, that they were able to do that and bring his voice back. But it was very emotional for me to hear.
Yeah. Well, and for our listeners that don't know, the first band that Chester Bennington was in before Linkin Park was called Grey Days. And now that Chester Bennington is tragically passed, the kind of band manager of that band is going back and taking Chester Bennington's vocals, like old recordings of his vocals, and he's kind of refreshing them and enhancing them. And now he's going to be releasing a new album under the band Grey Days with Chester singing the vocals, which I think is just really cool. And
amazing.
It's crazy that you can do that kind of thing today. So
It really is.
Yeah,
it really is.
But anyway, we could keep asking you questions all night, but we're getting short on time, so we'd better kind of wrap things up here. And we usually let our interviewee leave us with some lyrics, and so we're going to give you a second here to kind of compose yourself, and we can do that. So yeah, do you want to take it away, Amy?
So the lyrics that I've picked have a lot to do with my life. I told you that I am on my third marriage. I've been through divorce, and my children have been through divorce. And I think that divorce, affects everyone in the world at some point, whether it's closely related to them or an extended family at some point, and it can be a trauma. But one of my favorite songs by Depeche Mode is Precious, and it has to do with divorce and how it affects children. And I'll read the verses and then read the chorus at the end. So it goes, precious and fragile things need special handling. My God, what have we done to you? We always tried to share the tenderest of care. Now look what we have put you through. Angels with silver wings shouldn't know suffering. I wish I could take the pain for you. If God has a master plan that only He understands, I hope it's your eyes He's seeing through. I pray you learn to trust, have faith in both of us, and keep room in your hearts for two. Things get damaged, things get broken. I thought we'd manage, but words left unspoken left us so brittle, there was so little left to give.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time, and be sure to leave us a voice message.